It's so great to see people joining us today. Welcome to the second last Festival of Learning event in the Resilient Ontario Orchestras project. Thanks for joining us today. One of the things that I reflect on from time to time is the generosity of the people in our sector and the generosity of the funders and investors who help to keep us going. And I'd like to pay tribute at this point to all of the folks who have shared their stories and their experiences through the Resilient Ontario Orchestras project so generously. With particular note to today's presenters, Natasha Bood and Daniel McConnachie. Natasha worked as consultant with Orchestra Kingston over the last while, and we'll be learning from them. But really, I think everyone has stepped up in a generous and wonderful way, as, of course, has the Ontario Trillium Foundation. My name is Catherine Carlton. I'm Executive Director of Orchestras Canada, Orchestre Canada, and I'm speaking to you today from my home office in Peterborough, Ontario, long known as Nogajiwanong, the place at the end of the rapids. I am a gray-haired woman in my late 1950s, not exactly, with so short gray hair, glasses, and pink shirt, and a blurry background. I'm giving this visual description so that people who have low vision will still be able to track my voice and know who's speaking at any given point. I would also like to acknowledge the people who are the traditional stewards of the land where I live, and they are the Mississauga and the Anishinaabe people, and I'm proud and humbled to live on territory covered by the Williams Treaty, Treaty 20. I think I'll pass the talking stick now to my colleague, Lauren Drew. Lauren, over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Drew, Director of Member Services and Learning for OC. I'm also grateful to be joining from Peterborough, Nogajiwanong, and very grateful to have grown up here in these areas covered by the Williams Treaty. So my visual description, I am a woman in my 20s with now shorter dark brown hair with bangs and black glasses. I have a white wall behind me with a green and white Trent University degree and a poster of a bridge going over a river. So just a few tech notes before we get started. Please keep your video and audio muted throughout. It helps reduce background noise and preserve bandwidth for anyone who has slower internet. Notice that we are recording the session, and that'll be posted to the OC YouTube channel in the coming days. We'll circulate that to you after. There will be a Q&A portion near the end of the session, so please feel free to use the chat and type your questions for the speakers in there. We'll also have a few discussion questions for you to respond to in the chat. You'll notice that we have an option for English closed captioning from rev.com. So I've pasted instructions in the chat to enable that, but if you navigate to the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little closed captioning button that you can click. And again, we will be circulating a recording and resources from this presentation in the coming weeks. So that includes the PowerPoint, there will be a chat transcript, and also Natasha has prepared a tip sheet kind of summarizing some of the information. So with that, thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to Natasha to start presenting.
Hi, everybody. I'm coming to you from Milton, Ontario today, part of the Treaty Lands and Territory of the Mississaugas and the Credit First Nation, the traditional territory of the Huron, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people. And I'm a 40-something white woman with long blonde hair in front of a colorful painting with a couple of plants behind me. I was working with Orchestra Kingston as a consultant since about May, and we were working on a project involving volunteer engagement. And so Orchestra Kingston came to us with the following challenge. They were asking, how can we expand upon our pool of volunteers in order to build a strong and vibrant community around the organization? So they were asking, where can we find volunteers? How can we retain them? What motivation can we as an organization provide? How can we build and retain our board and ensure that we have the skills that we need? And they also had a little PS or postscript to the challenge. And if there's time, they wanted to look at some ideas to increase their fundraising dollars. And at the beginning, I thought maybe these two things are a little bit separate. But as we moved through the project, we realized that these the the way that we're going to look at this project kind of brought these things together. So more about that in a bit. So some of our goals we decided upon were to gradually grow and build a key group of volunteers that we could really use to support the organization. To implement a system to retain and constantly build upon our volunteer team. And to, really importantly, to build authentic relationships with our volunteers to inspire them to engage on a deeper level with the organization. So Lauren, right now, it would be great if we could pull up the first poll. So why do your volunteers support your organization with their time? So for the glory of being associated with our orchestra, to be close to the music, to make their community a better place, to meet new people and make connections. And the last one, because we have a long-standing passion for handing out house programs. So if you want to plug in your answer, and Lauren, you can read out kind of where we're at.
All right, we'll keep it open for about 25 more seconds. I see responses starting to come in. No one has selected for the glory of being associated with our orchestra yet, but we'll see. We'll give it about 10 more seconds to get your response in and share the results. Okay, ending the poll, sharing the results. So the top response is to be close to the music. About 65% of people said that. Next is to make their community a better place. And third, to meet new people and make connections.
Great. So when we looked at this this project, we were thinking about that last one, and that's a way that a lot of organizations, I think, kind of think about their volunteers. We're all really busy thinking about other things that are going on, and you know, we need volunteers to just get things done, right? To get those programs handed out and to get that ushering done at the concerts, but sometimes we're not really putting our full focus into this. So we tackled the goals that we had with an overall lens of relational volunteer engagement, rather than a transactional one where, you know, somebody volunteers to take tickets and maybe you give them a t-shirt or tickets to a concert, something like that. So we wanted to think about it in a deeper way. So we looked at who our volunteers are, why they want to volunteer for us, how we can make the experience great for them. And essential to this relational strategy is really creating an overall feeling within your organization of positivity and working together as humans to build the art form. So, and it's also really important to remember that volunteers are there giving their hard-earned free time to hand out programs to your audience. And they're there for a reason, a love of your organization or the art form. And they're there to contribute to the community, and they really want to be a part of it. So our goal was to focus on the experience, to give them more of why they want to volunteer, which in turn will lead them to wanting to dedicate more time, energy, etc., to the organization. And it can be kind of helpful to think of everyone around your organization as a potential future major donor, from your ticket-taking volunteers to your part-time staff, to your board members and past board members, and even your orchestra. So Lauren, I'm going to get you to pull up the next poll. So question for you all, can you fire a volunteer? So your choices are absolutely or no, we need all the help we can get.
All right, responses are coming in. We'll give about 15 more seconds. All right, I will share the results. So we've got 85% of people saying absolutely you can fire a volunteer, and then 15% saying no, we need all the help we can get.
Great. So yes, you guys have got it. You absolutely can, it may seem counterintuitive, but you can do it gently with integrity or move them over to a different position. But a relational volunteer strategy means that you want a positive group of people who are working towards the same goals. And if you come across somebody who's working against that, it's okay to ask them to step back. So a little real life example for you, I once worked at a classical music organization that had private master classes for emerging musicians. And we had a volunteer who was also a donor who was really, really close to the program, but started writing directly to the students with kind of snarky advice and comments. And that's the kind of situation where you have to ask a volunteer to step back. And, you know, for the good of your organization as a whole, sometimes you have to do that. The other thing we were thinking about in working towards our goals was depth over breadth. So focusing on the depth of your relationship with volunteers rather than the number of volunteers that you can recruit and that number that you can put on all of your grant reports. It's essential to have enough volunteers to support your programs. But by creating a great relationship with, 20 volunteers, you may do a better service to the organization than having 100 volunteers that only help out once or twice and don't come back. So there's also an option if you're an organization with larger number of volunteers that you need to have. You can accomplish this relational strategy by having a couple of super volunteers who you can train to treat their group of volunteers that work with them to focus on relationships as well. So these 20 or 10 or 5 volunteers, depending on your scale, can become ambassadors for your volunteer program and your organization as a whole, and can eventually work up and become donors or board members or just more engaged regular volunteers. So an example for you of depth versus breadth, ages ago, when I was a student at Humber College's Arts Admin program, our program got asked to send students to volunteer at a performance. And so we were all eager and we got there and nobody welcomed us. We had no instructions. And it was a 2-day kind of weekend of performances, and we spent most of the weekend sitting around chatting backstage in the dressing room because they had too many volunteers and they didn't know what to do with all of us, and they also didn't seem to want to just send us home. So I still think about that today, and I think, that organization, I don't know if that's one that I'm excited to donate more time to or to go as a volunteer, and I have a long-standing kind of memory of that. So it's really important to think about, what kind of experience you're giving to your volunteers. So we're going to start talking about kind of the steps to create your relational volunteer system. So we'll go through them in more detail, but number 1 is to create an organized volunteer process. And number 2, recruit your volunteers. And number 3, gratitude. So creating your organized volunteer process. If your systems are good, you create a good experience for your volunteers and they'll want to come back. So there's nothing worse than volunteering for something and feeling like you aren't helping or you don't even know what to do. So here's some things that you can use. Utilize a free online platform to organize your volunteers, something like signup.com, where volunteers can see what shifts are available and they can even go in to sign up on their own. Creating quick, short job descriptions for each volunteer job. So example, your box office attendant, your usher. And this allows volunteers to have a full description of their duties and to take full ownership over them. And I mentioned this a bit before, but you can create positions of super volunteers. And there could be a super volunteer who leads the box office team and the one who leads the usher team or one that works on a special event. And these volunteers can even be responsible for recruiting new volunteers and letting the board know about excellent volunteers that they've met that could be wonderful to have on the board. Host an annual volunteer training session with food, of course, if that becomes possible in the future in person. And do it at the beginning of each year in your venue and walk everyone through their jobs so they have a really good, solid understanding of things before they come in for their first volunteer shift. So a quick poll. Lauren, could you pull up the next one? Do you have job descriptions for your volunteers? So we have yes, no, or who has time for that?
All right, this one's short, so we'll just give you about 10 more seconds to respond here. Okay, last chance, 3 more seconds. And I will share the results. So we've got 54% saying yes, 38% saying no, and 8% saying who has time for that.
Exactly. So it's interesting that it's pretty closely tied, and I totally understand who has time for that because you're busy doing other things, but it can be very, very helpful for your volunteers to both for recruiting and for letting them know what they have to do. So yeah, step 2, recruit your volunteers. So the kind of secret of this is that you most likely already know your future volunteers. You have an orchestra full of people, an audience base, they're filled with potential volunteers. So start there and build your volunteer base out from there. Tap into your network and let them know that you need volunteers. Give them easy ways to spread the word for you. And ensure that they know that you have an organized process ready to greet them when they come to you. So email out a call to volunteers to your email list. You can advertise in your house program, post it on social media. And you can also use sites like in Kingston, where we're using volunteerkingston.com. And a lot of smaller cities and bigger cities have an organization like this where you can utilize. You can also put up posters in libraries, high schools, and universities. It's a great place to find volunteers as well. And then step 3, gratitude and recognition. And this is super important. So brainstorm creative volunteer thank you events for the end of the year, things that will work for your organization. An example could be the orchestra makes breakfast for the volunteers. The conductor signs handwritten thank you cards for the volunteers. Things that are really kind of personal and unique can be great to get people to keep coming back. You can give an annual award for volunteerism, or you can nominate your volunteers for a volunteer award in your community. This is a great way to get some extra wonderful PR for your organization and to also celebrate somebody who's done great work for you. Celebrate your most dedicated volunteers in front of your entire organization at the end of the season. And something to really keep in mind, I think, especially right now, is that some of the people who are your regular volunteers maybe haven't been able to volunteer in person for the last 2 years and maybe feeling isolated and because of the pandemic. And I'm just wondering if in the chat, you might want to let everyone know if you've had some great ways of keeping up with those volunteers during the pandemic. And how do you recognize and thank your volunteers? I'd love to hear some of your ideas, and we can look through them at the end. Board development. So Orchestra Kingston also wanted to work on developing their board. They had an ongoing challenge of filling the vice president role, and board volunteers can actually be thought of in the same relational ways as we've been discussing already. So your board can come from your network of volunteers, your audience, your orchestra, and your community connections. You can develop your board strategically so it can be filled with the types of skills that the organization needs at this point in its development. Your nominations committee can focus on recruiting and interviewing potential board members. This committee can also consider succession for each position and how board members can grow into different roles. The committee can ensure that the board consists of people with different skill sets who come from a variety of backgrounds and can work together with all of their different viewpoints to build and sustain the organization. So you can do a skills and needs and perspectives assessment. So for example, the group currently has a good marketing person, and the organization needs board members that have volunteer recruitment experience or fundraising backgrounds. It could also be useful to recruit a board member with like not-for-profit expertise or strategic planning background. So if you're considering those, then you can kind of shape your board descriptions to suit what you're looking for. There's even skills matrices and Excel spreadsheets that you can use to track the skills your board currently has and what they need. Real life example of this is that I was executive director of a classical music organization that at one time had 12 board members and 7 of them were lawyers. And the reason that happened was that the lawyers on the nominating committee kept thinking of great friends that they could bring on board. And before we knew it, a majority of the board were lawyers, and we were kind of missing some other key perspectives on the board. So it's really important to keep an eye on that when you're recruiting your board volunteers. And you can also create board job descriptions, just like your volunteer ones, so that it allows you to recruit people who know what they're signing on for and also know that their personal expertise will be really of use in this volunteer position. All right, so Lauren, next poll we have is, does your board have term limits? So quick yes or no on this one.
They're coming in. Let's give it about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to share the results. So unanimously for the folks who responded yes to having term limits on the board.
That's great. That's great. I've seen some organizations that consider term limits to be about limiting people's volunteer abilities. And it's more about creating boundaries and expectations. So it can be, of course, as you all know, 100%. It can be helpful to have a system where board members are aware of their expectations about the length of their commitment before they begin. And it's helpful for preparation in succession planning. So if you know that your treasurer is in their final year, the nomination committee can start looking for a treasurer specifically. It also keeps your ideas fresh and a system of creating room for new people and voices to give their volunteer time to an organization. So once you know what you want the board member to be doing and how long they'll be signing on for, you can advertise the opportunity. So take the descriptions you made and create an advertisement for the positions you're searching for. Post the descriptions just like a job application on your website. Send them out in an email to your email list, post on social media or Work and Culture or Charity Village. Send them to your orchestra members and ask if they know anyone with these skills and ask them to pass the descriptions along. And gratitude and recognition also super important. So recognize your board on your website and in your host programs. You could even include short biographies or fun little Q&As about what they love most about your orchestra. Consider creative ideas to recognize long-term service on the board. You know, dedicate a concert or performance to somebody who's been absolutely amazing to you. Encourage and support all contributions and keep the board meetings fun and welcoming. And don't forget to celebrate things. I once had a board member who turned 90 and we had a great 90th birthday around a board meeting table. You can make it really fun. And a great little board tip is create name tags for your board members so they can wear them in the lobby and answer audience questions. And don't forget to give your board a job at each concert. One that I love is to get everyone mingling in the lobby is to create a challenge to meet 3 new people and report back to the board at the next meeting about who they met. It's a great way to meet people, to get to understand why people are at your concert face to face, and a great way to expand on that relational strategy. And remember at the beginning, we were talking about that PS, let's do some fundraising. And just a little bit of an extra point. So as we started to work through the project with Orchestra Kingston, we realized how similar building a relational volunteer program is to building relationships with your donors. So I just wanted to add in a few quick notes about the gratitude side of fundraising. Build and organize a reliable system to ensure that you're thanking your donors and your sponsors regularly. It's really difficult to get that first gift, but much easier to get the second with careful stewardship. And the more personal the stewardship, the better. Great examples are inviting donors to a dress rehearsal or even dinner with your conductor. At one organization I worked at, we had a board member who actually just loved to host events and cook for people. So we actually had her host a backyard lunch for 3 of our volunteers who had volunteered for 10 years. And it was a neat way to both thank the volunteers and get the board member more involved, and it was fantastic. And another interesting little relational tip versus a transactional strategy. You know, when you hear of an amazing donor giving a gift to another organization in your community, there's often an idea that people should immediately go to that donor and ask for money for your organization. And I'm going to suggest you approach it a little bit differently, and that would be to actually write a thank you note to that donor for donating to that other organization and for helping to build your community, rather than just using it as a time to ask. I can tell you, I've seen this in real life, that can work to build a better relationship with that donor rather than just asking for money right away, something that you can build upon in the future. So in order to just wrap up here, by creating an organized and purposeful relationship with your volunteers, including your board members, you'll create a better experience for everyone, and in turn be able to better maintain your current volunteers and encourage others to join. And remember, while you're doing this, to keep a close look on what is working and what isn't. And don't be afraid to shift focus and your efforts towards what is working as you're going along. And now I'm going to bring Catherine back on to do a little bit of Q&A.
Right, Catherine and Daniel, if you can turn your video on, I will put you up on the screen. Sorry.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Daniel McConnachie. I'm president of Orchestra Kingston. Kingston is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and it's covered by Treaty 57 of the Upper Canada Treaties of 1783. Kingston is located at the confluence of the Cataraqui Rivers and Lake Ontario, and are the source of the St. Lawrence River.
Okay, and sorry for the fumbling, folks. At a certain point, Lauren took over all powers, and so I was voiceless and cameraless, but thank you very much for letting me in, Lauren, and thank you, Daniel, for leaping into speech. So I'm going to do a little bit of an interview and raise some questions with Daniel and Natasha. And we'll also weave in some of the questions that have come up in the chat and that will continue to come up in the chat. So Daniel, this is a question that we pose to pretty much everybody who's been an orchestra guest on the RU Resilient Ontario Orchestras series. What's happening with Orchestra Kingston these days? Are you rehearsing? Are you performing? You've got a new manager. Bring us up to speed.
So we are rehearsing. We started rehearsals at the beginning of October. We have a concert scheduled for December the 12th, and our conductor has us well in hand, and the pieces are moving along. It's going to be a very short concert, no intermission. We're performing in a church that has been converted into a performance area called the Spire. It seats over 800 people, so we're looking at socially distancing our audience and socially distancing the members of the orchestra as well. We're still at the stage where the string players are all still working on their own stands. Everyone's masked. The winds are unmasked when they're performing, and the masks are put on when they're not.
Okay, so there's been a lot of work done on health and safety protocols, but I imagine that with the first downbeat of the first rehearsal, there was just such a sense of relief and joy.
Oh yes, yes, it was great to all get back together again. Although it was a
Okay,
lot of work to get there.
we've had other webinars that focus specifically on that one, but really great to get the word that you're back in action. And I understand as well that there was a transition of manager for Orchestra Kingston. Do you have a new person in place now?
We do, and he's a young gentleman. He's working out pretty well so far. Our previous manager moved from Kingston to Moncton, and so we were kind of managerless, but it happened during the pandemic, and so we didn't really move forward with it because we weren't really up and running. And but now, yes, he's well ensconced, and we're moving forward.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you. I just wanted to get a little bit of a sense of what you've had to work on this fall. There's a lot going on for sure. So this is a question I'm going to start with Natasha, and Daniel, feel free to leap in. I think Natasha really covered this in the slide, but I'm just going to try posing the question a slightly different way. There was the questions that Orchestra Kingston posed when they applied to participate in the Resilient Ontario Orchestras question, and then there's what emerged as you worked together. Natasha, were there any surprises between what was initially proposed as the work you would be doing and what you discovered when you began working with OK, sort of on the ground or via Zoom?
Yeah, I think the surprise was well when I guess I described it already, but when we first looked at it and I saw kind of the two things that we were looking at, I was like, oh, okay, so we're kind of doing a bit of one project about volunteers and how to get more, and one about fundraising and some ideas about looking at some different things. But when we really started thinking about the volunteer aspect and how we were going to get where we wanted to be, it became really clear that those two things are really tied together, and just how important it sounds almost wishy-washy and airy, but how important it is to manage your human relationships with a lot of focus and attention, just as much as you're putting on a lot of other things in your organization.
Right. Thank you for that. And thank you for just underlining that point. Daniel, what was surprising to you between the submission of the application and what emerged in the work with Natasha?
Um, well, I mean, there was things that we didn't really realize already existed here in Kingston. There's a sort of clearinghouse of volunteers. None of us were aware of this availability of that. Um, so that was a major surprise, and of course we've acted on that. We've got ourselves now registered on it, and we're putting things up as we need them. Um, the other thing was the connection between volunteerism and actually fundraising. It doesn't sort of come to mind that they're actually connected in any way. Um, so that was the biggest, that was a surprise as well. And we're kind of moving forward with that as well.
Well, I'm reminded of a report that Business for the Arts published a number of years ago, where they interviewed corporate sponsors who have an interest in the arts about their experience of working with arts groups. And one of them said, we're really tired of being treated as an automated teller. We're not machines. You don't just press the buttons and the money comes out. Please talk to us like we're people. And please try to understand what we're trying to accomplish in our business and how the work you're doing can perhaps be of assistance. And I've thought about that because, we do think, oh, there's people over there with time. We need their time. Let's go get them. There's people over there with money. We need money. Let's go get them. And, it can turn into quite a transactional sort of thinking. Those of us who don't have enough see people who've got more, and we, sort of identify them. We might call them prospects. We might call them targets. And there's sort of a military or resource extraction language that we might potentially use. And in fact, they're people, they have hearts, they care. And how can we make common cause with them and help them live their dreams is, I suppose, part of the magic of what I took from how you've spoken about this project, Daniel, and the approach that you took as well. So thank you for that. Daniel, I'd love to hear a bit more from you about Orchestra Kingston's current volunteer structure. So what's the composition of your board of directors?
Our board of directors consists of people who we have some people from the community. We have there's a lot of musicians either who are involved in the orchestra as performers. We have a couple of musicians who are from outside the orchestra who are on the board as well. We've just since we started up and running again, we've added 3 new members to the board. One of them, one is a musician from outside. The other 2 are actually in the orchestra. One lady has experience of fundraising, and so we've sort of added these complements to our board. The addition of 3 new people is important because, as Natasha pointed out, we do have someone in the vice president's position, but they've indicated that they have no interest in being the president. So we're actually looking for somebody to sort of step into that role. We'll have to see how the new members work out for a while, and maybe we can see if one of them will move into that position. I could always stand to have someone take over my job.
It's one of those things, and I'm just thinking about Orchestra Kingston and sort of where you're at in your evolution as an organization that may have started as a passion project for a group of really committed people, and that there's a strong self-help element in terms of that few of those committed people agreeing to serve on the board in order to build and sustain their passion project. But as the organization grows and evolves, that engaging people outside the orchestra itself, so it moves essentially from being kind of a co-op to being something that is more reflective of and engaged with the broader community. In terms of your comment about vice presidents, we have a joke at Orchestras Canada. It's an unpleasant joke, but it's still true. I urge anybody who's on the call today to check out the Wikipedia entry on the drummers in Spinal Tap. Essentially, Spinal Tap, the mockumentary bad rock band, went through an awful lot of drummers, and each one came to a mysterious end. One of them caught on fire. Anyway, it's just one of them simply disappeared. I'll make this relevant simply by saying that that's our observation about our vice presidents on the Orchestras Canada board, is that quite often they commit to being the vice president, but something happens that prevents them from turning into president. And it's happened, I think, sort of 8 times out of 10 in my life with the organization. So, just people's lives change. And I'd also say that one of the challenges around leadership succession in board situations is when you have a strong leader with a long history and a lot of insight, it can be daunting to step into those shoes. And I'm going to say something saucy here. It can also be hard for the longtime leader to let go.
Well,
Are you suggesting that's not the, but just to say that there are human dynamics, there's a desire for things to be done extremely well. There is humility on the part of people who would potentially see themselves succeeding. And there's also, dare I say it, and I'm just thinking about Natasha's discussions around job descriptions, that kind of thing. It's so much easier just to go with what's in your head. And I speak from profound personal experience here. It's a lot easier for me to just say, oh no, this is how we do it, than actually write it down. And so the whole business of transmission of knowledge, fabulously, it takes time.
oh, it does. Like that's what I'm discovering with our manager. I mean, I have to think. There's stuff that I just intuitively think that this should be happening now, but of course he doesn't know that. I have to make sure he does.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just sort of pondering these various stages and acknowledging both extraordinary work you've done and the extraordinary transitions that you're experiencing and setting in motion. But how exciting just to get to play and compose, I suppose. Okay, let's hop over a little bit. Daniel, I'm going to go back to you and say, what's on your to-do list now? You've already alluded to a bit of documentation and discussion with the new manager. What else are you working on right now, following up on this this consultation?
Well, I actually have a board meeting today at 5. We have to discuss our AGM. Of course, usually our AGM is in September, but we've delayed it. As long as we get it done before December 31st, we're good to go as far as our charity status goes. So we're going to have an in-person AGM because we're having in-person rehearsals. We'll have it next Tuesday at the beginning of the rehearsal. It's usually pretty straightforward. In this case, we'll be looking at having the membership vote on our new members of the board, and we'll outline our financial situation, where we are at this time. Of course, like all the orchestras right now, we've had no income for some time. We're lucky we do have some charity donations that are going to see us through at least until Christmas. And but that's basically where we are.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of pomp and circumstance that's associated with an annual general meeting, an event that, strictly speaking, if you look at the agenda, might take 15 minutes, but it's really important in terms of the conveying of information, transparency, and obviously demonstration of keen interest in the will of the membership. So good luck on that one. The idea of holding an in-person annual general meeting, may I suggest cookies?
Oh, you can't have food.
Well, okay, perhaps people can be given a bag of cookies to take away from the meeting with them, just as a bribe for showing up. All good. And okay, but it sounds as though the work to recruit new members has been done consciously and conscientiously. The work to engage more volunteers is ongoing. And I'm assuming that the work on relationship building through bringing that lens to your fundraising is also going well. Natasha, I'd love to hear your reflections on tips you might offer to other orchestras going through similar challenges.
I think it's just really important to just flip around your thinking and how you're looking at that, from what you need done to what they want from you. And just to kind of rethink your whole way through the process of how you're looking at your volunteers can be really helpful, just to take a few minutes to do it. And I know it's one of those things that when you've got grant reports to write and all of this other stuff, it seems like the lowest thing on your list, but it can be a really helpful thing to just take a good look at.
Okay. I'm going to now harvest some of the thoughts in the chat and move on to those. So we've had an interesting reflection on the evolving nature of people's desire to volunteer. The folks who are sincerely interested in a one and done, where they get a sticker and a lollipop and say goodbye and don't have to go to meetings. And I'm curious to know if Natasha or Daniel, you've got thoughts on sort of generational evolution of people's volunteer interests, those who are really in it for long-term sustained attention, and those who are into, say, gut their volunteer hours, or as a one-time thing. What are your sort of thoughts on how you're seeing that unfolding in your experiences? Natasha, can we start with you?
Yeah, when I was at Toronto Summer Music Festival, we had a huge volunteer group that would come in, and this is a couple years back and before pandemic. But you're right, there's definitely a many different demographics of volunteers that we would see. We would see those university students who would want their hours. But there were a few that I noticed when we spent some more time talking to them and making sure that they were doing things that they were interested in. They're the kind of people that we could keep coming back year after year. But there are others who, you're right, just wanted those hours and in and out and that sort of thing. And then a lot of our volunteers were our more regular ones were people who were just retiring and were looking for something to do socially in the community. And so we really, really thought about that a lot in terms of like how we can get them to come back. But in terms of the shift through the pandemic, I haven't quite seen that so much in a performing arts lens from my own perspective. But maybe Daniel, you've seen that change in your volunteers.
Um, Most of our volunteers usually are like as Catherine said, one and done. Given the nature of our orchestra, it's usually somebody's spouse helping at the front of house. The manager usually sort of takes the leadership role of sort of having front of house work, and then of course the front of house now is going to be an entirely different thing. Um, Most of our ticket sales for this concert that's coming up are electronic. We have to make sure we're checking vaccine status. Now, if it's an electronic ticket, we set it up so that we have their phone number, so we don't need contact tracing for that. Um, we are selling some physical tickets. One of the outlets, we have an outlet, a bookstore here in Kingston that's selling tickets for us because there are still, I mean, given the demographic of our orchestra, some of our audience members are not computer literate and are not willing to sort of suffer their way through an Eventbrite process. So they would rather go into the bookstore and purchase tickets there. But we've worked out a process where that way it was suggested by our manager that we number those tickets and not number any other tickets, just the ones from the bookstore, instead of asking the bookstore to ask for telephone numbers and contact tracing information. That's now down to us to get when we receive one of those tickets. It's got a number on it and it's been highlighted, so it'll stand up to the front of house. They'll be able to identify those tickets.
Right, so that's some genuine complications in the way that the work is getting done.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking of, let me try this a different way and then possibly roll on to another question. It feels to me as though there are the one and done folks with whom perhaps a more sustained relationship for other short-term volunteer engagements can happen. But then there's also this question about where board members come from. Those folks who are willing to attend a meeting and really dig in over the course of 1 year, 3 years, or 6 years.
Well, I think a lot of the board members have some kind of investment in what we're doing. So a lot of them are members of the orchestra, or they're musicians themselves. We have we have two members who are not musicians and who are outside of the board. Sorry, I forgot. But they're both actively they enjoy music. The one lady runs a meetup club. I don't know if you know what that is. It's sort of
Yep.
she has meetup clubs for dinners and things like that. Anyways, one of them is for music because she loves music concerts. So she works on our board.
So she's a networker. Okay,
Yeah.
I want to let's move on here. There's a spicy question in the chat. And I think it was occasioned by Natasha's one of her spicy polling questions. Can you fire a board?
Sure, the members can fire a board.
Well, yeah, exactly. That was also my response in the chat, which is to say that it is the specifics of the firing are laid out in your governing legislation. I believe currently many of the Ontario orchestras are covered by the not-for-profit section of the Ontario Corporations Act, but the new Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act is now in force, and there are strict regulations about when and how a board can be fired. But this is in the power of the membership, and one of the reasons why it's really important to know who your members are and to communicate with them with great care is because they ultimately have that power, whether it is at the annual general meeting or whether it is at an extraordinary meeting of members. So those things are in place, and indeed that power is in the hands of the membership. Certainly, there was another question earlier about term limits and how they are enforced. Actually, we've got the clear legal question about who can fire a board. Let's talk about the enforcement of term limits. Any expertise that either of you would like to share about term limits and their gentle enforcement? Natasha?
Yeah,
I'm going to go to
Daniel.
Natasha first, actually.
Okay.
Come on.
Okay, I would just say, like, it's gentle enforcement of it, I think can be done pretty easily if it's really, really clear and transparent in terms of what people are signing on for at the beginning. One thing I've seen boards do is just kind of at, around time of the year when they start talking about nominations, is that the chair of the committee comes up and says, this is where each of these people are on their terms. This is when it ends. This is, the end of their 3-year term. And if they can add an additional one, they'd have to be voted on, that sort of thing. So it's just regular communication about it so that everyone knows where they're at and where their end is near or their continuation.
Yeah,
Their
I
best
think.
before date.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Their best before date.
Well, it may not even be the best before, but it's certainly something that is a regular part of the conversation. And the other thing that I suggested in my response in the chat was it needs to be across the board and no special favors unless, and this is a legitimate exception, there is language in the bylaws that permits a sitting president to extend their term as president beyond the end of their term in order to complete their term as president. So for example, at OC, we have a 2-year term for presidents. Hypothetically, if we had a president who was going to be finishing their 2nd year in year 7 of their service, that would be feasible, but it's because it's laid out in our bylaws that's acceptable. But it's absolutely normalized that you're signing up for this length of term. We have regular performance-based conversations with board members so that we know what we need to do better in order to better engage their time and talents. But similarly, there's also robust feedback from the chair of the governance committee about how it's going, and careful moving people around different committees to find the place where they can really blossom. But definitely a sense that all things must come to an end, even if it also means that in some cases they take a year off and then they could potentially serve again. Mm-hmm. There are ways of working with that sustain the knowledge, but I think it just, as Natasha suggests, it needs to be normalized. And we sort of leave that one there. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more scanning because we're into the. Okay, here's an interesting one. Volunteers who really like doing one kind of work, but they aren't necessarily actually needed there. They might be needed someplace else. How might one negotiate or discuss where the needs actually are and sort through if people are, how to ensure that their time and talent is being best used in the pursuit of the organization's work? Any tips or thoughts on this one? Natasha, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I see that if you have people who want to work on office tasks, but you don't have that many office tasks, and I've definitely seen that one before. It's one of those things, like, for me personally, I don't believe in creating work so that you can create something for a volunteer just so that they can be engaged, because it becomes a point where you're spending too much of your time creating things for other people. But if you can be creative in the other way of talking to that person and finding more out about them, and if maybe like laying out your other jobs that you do have, or if there's something more administrative surrounding them, a part of that they can take on. Maybe you can be creative and actually get some help on something that you need, but it's definitely a careful balance of making sure that you're not creating more work for yourself too.
Okay, and I'm looking at a number of points here in terms of orientation of both of new volunteers, but particularly of board members. And Daniel, I'll start with you. You've just brought on 3 new board members. Did you do anything special this time around in terms of orientation?
No, not this time. So they're actually, this will be their first meeting. Is the meeting we're having today? It's basically to discuss. So it's just to sort of get their feet wet and see what we're looking at as far as our AGM is concerned and our concert preparations. So this will be a chance for our manager is going to manage the front of house. But maybe we'll see if some of them would volunteer. We'll sort of see where we're going to go with this. We don't really have an orientation program.
Okay, and Natasha, any thoughts on board orientation?
Yeah, I see this the comment about the welcome kit, and I think that's really, really helpful to have something that you can just send over to them with your your most recent strategic plan and your governance documents or anything else you've been working on recently. Another thing that I've done in different organizations in the before times, I would make sure as an executive director to go and have lunch with the new board members so we can get to know each other and have a chat on what they might be most interested in or who they might know that could help for fundraising, etc. But I've also done it virtually now during the pandemic to have those kind of orientation quick meetings for all the new board members together, which has worked really well so that when people are going to the first meeting, they have a better understanding of what kind of board it is, what kind of things you're working on, that sort of thing. So I think it's helpful for people.
Yeah, we've also stepped up our game at Orchestras Canada. I'll share a link with Lauren that she can share with folks. It's actually from a not-for-profit blog by a woman named Joan Gary, and she's got a sample script for an orientation session. We've worked with that a couple of times. We've stepped up our game this year. We're doing 2 full-on orientation sessions, so a total of 3 hours. Governance chair, board chair, me, and the new board member or board members. We've been doing them on Zoom because our board is all over the place. We have a pretty good orientation manual. The problem is it's so freaking thick that nobody ever makes their way through it. So we thought giving a bit more time and also assigning a buddy who has board experience, who's a sitting board member. We've paired people up with a buddy / mentor who's on the board now, and they have an opportunity to spend time together before each board meeting and after. And I'm called in to help if I can. But just one of those things, in general, there's a theory that in year 1, people are sitting there listening because they're afraid to open their mouths. Year 2, they really start to get into it. Year 3, they're maximally productive and generative in their participation. And then in some cases, we're saying goodbye to them. So it's figuring out how to get people comfortable participating, asking questions, making contributions as quickly as possible. And no one wants to seem dumb in a public place. So I think there's some things that we can potentially share there in terms of what our experience has been. Just going to double check. Oh, Lauren has slapped a few more things in the website. One other question that came up, how about written agreements for board members or for volunteers? Some kind of contract. Any thoughts on that? I'll start with Natasha and then see if Daniel's got some thoughts too.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to have it written out so that people will read it and bring up questions and also have something that they've signed and that they're feels more official for sure. I think that's a great idea.
I mean, I'm just Daniel.
Well, we don't have a written agreement in place. It's usually I guess it's all done verbally, and people come to the meeting and then and show interest, and then the board will have a vote to accept them as board members. And we usually do that after they come to one meeting to get a sense
Right.
of what we're about.
Right. Okay, I see that we're at 1 o'clock. I can't tell you how much I appreciated today's conversation, the presentation, and the sort of sense of what made it real. I also, of course, want to thank Natasha and Daniel, as well as the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Join us next week. It's the grand finale of the Festival of Learning. We're welcoming Jamie Gamble, who is an expert in evaluation. Jamie's been working with us on the project from the beginning and is helping us put together our report to Trillium. He helped us design the various surveys, including the one that you've been completing at each webinar. So please complete it, because it really helps us plan what our next activities are going to look like and provide Trillium with some meaningful input on how everything went, what we can do better next time, and the fact that we do want there to be a next time, well supported by you. So thank you, everyone. Wonderful times. Watch your email inbox. More to come. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.